Welcome to another episode of the Mental Health Break. Hi, I'm Dr. Nafisa Sekandari, a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in anxiety-based disorders. I created the Mental Health Break podcast to give you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies to help you prioritize your mental health. Mental illness can cost you time and money. Ignoring your symptoms will only make the problems worse. Taking time out of your busy day to dedicate to improving your mental health can lead to long-term health and wellness. In this podcast, each week you'll learn tips, tricks, and proven strategies to help you regain control of your life, all while prioritizing your mental health. If you want to improve your life, regain control of your mental health, and feel empowered, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Today's episode is brought to you by the Transforming Anxiety course, an online, self-paced anxiety course to help you manage and control your anxiety from the comfort, privacy, and convenience of your own home. Learn how to transform your anxiety in just 6 short weeks. Course registration is now open. To learn more, visit transforminganxiety.com/course. I'm so excited to talk to Lindsay Bryan-Podvin, who is a financial expert here to talk to us about the psychological and emotional side of money. Let me briefly introduce her before I bring her on. Lindsay Podvin is the owner and founder of Mind Money Balance. She is a biracial financial therapist who started her career in the field of mental health treatment and advocacy. As the first financial therapist in Michigan, she combines financial literacy with the emotional and psychological side of money. She always had an interest in mental health and found an even greater love in working at the intersection of mental health and money. She is a published author of the Plutus-nominated book, The Financial Anxiety Solution, which helps people work through their anxiety when it comes to engaging with their money. Lindsay has a degree in sociology from Michigan State University, her master's in social work from the University of Michigan, and certificates in financial social work and financial therapy. Hi, Lindsay. Welcome to the Mental Health Break podcast. I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so excited to talk to you.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here and to talk with your audience today.
I am excited because this is a very important topic. We're going to talk about financial literacy and hopefully discuss ways we can reduce our anxiety when it comes to finances and money, just money in general. The past few years, obviously, has been crazy with the pandemic and now the inflation. It's been pretty turbulent. And so I know a lot of people are struggling with financial anxiety. And this is why your interest and your focus in your job really had me interested, because I know a lot of people are struggling right now with financial anxiety. I specialize in anxiety-based disorders, and financial anxiety can create a lot of stress for people. So is this the kind of, are these the kind of issues that you deal with in your field, in your work, when it comes to finances and money?
Yeah, so the bulk of my clients come to me with one of two main presenting emotions around their money. So the first big one is, of course, anxiety, this feeling of being nervous, worried, or on edge, feeling like they don't know enough about money. Or the other big feeling that folks have when they come to me is feeling shame, feeling embarrassed, feeling behind, feeling lost. And both of those emotions are things that show up in the therapy room and are things that we need to talk about. As you know, so many of us in this field of mental health and of mental wellness, we haven't been trained on how to talk about money. And oftentimes in our training, we either don't get the training to talk about it, or we're told that it's really not our lane. But I think because so much of our relationship with money is emotional and psychological, it behooves us to make sure that we know how to talk to our clients about money. That doesn't mean we have to be financial experts or advisors. It just means we have to get comfortable sitting with the discomfort, sitting with the anxiety, and sitting with the shame, which are all things that as therapists we're equipped to do.
So it's so true, because there is a psychological piece. You don't have to you're not giving advice on how to increase wealth necessarily. This is all about our own upbringing and the messages that we've heard growing up about what money means. And we all have different understandings of that. And I know that for a lot of people, their mindset and their mental blocks can prevent them from financial success as well. So can you just kind of talk about the types of people that you do work and what brings somebody to you when it comes to needing guidance or direction, how do they find you? And then what are some types of people that you work with?
So people tend to find me one of two ways. The big one is Google, because what are we doing when we are anxious in the middle of the night? We are typing into our smartphones. Why can't I sleep at night because I'm so worried about money, or how to talk to my partner about money, or how to negotiate a raise at work, right? We're typing into Google questions for things that we are looking for answers for. So a lot of people find me by way of Google. And the other big way that people find me is through things like this. To be honest with you, a lot of people find me through other podcasts, through other news outlets, through some guest posts that I've done. So those are the two main ways that people find me, but rarely do they find me by typing something like financial therapist into Google, because most people think that what they need is a tangible fix. They need a budget. They need a spreadsheet. They need a plan. And those things are great. I'm not against spreadsheets or budgets or financial planning at all. But also we have to think about what's underneath the budget, the spreadsheet, and the planning, and how can we make it work best for them. So in terms of who I tend to see in my practice, I tend to see, because I'm a millennial, I tend to see a lot of millennials in my practice, but I also tend to see people outside of that age range. So I would say about 60 to 70% of my clients are millennials, and then a few trend a bit older and a few trend a bit younger. My clients are not folks who are chronically in credit card debt or are struggling to make ends meet. My clients tend to be the ones who have followed the rules. As you know, treating folks with anxiety, we also have to tend to have this overlap of anxiety and perfectionism. So a lot of my clients are the ones who have done, quote unquote, the right things. They have set aside enough money in an emergency fund. They have negotiated a raise at work. They have cut their latte spending, but they still don't feel good when it comes to money. They still feel really anxious, really avoidant, really ashamed. And so my job with them is to help them kind of separate that anxiety and that perfectionism, and to look at it with love and curiosity and figure out, where is it coming from and how can we dial it down so that they can better engage with their money, so it doesn't fall into that perfectionism trap of researching and being overwhelmed, or into that procrastination trap of just putting it off and avoiding it, that tends to help with the temporary symptoms of anxiety, but in the long haul, it might not be the best approach to coping with financial anxiety.
Yeah, one of the things with anxiety is a lot of irrational fears and beliefs that kind of get in the way, and mindset definitely can impact. And I mean, I had a patient literally try to take his own life because of his beliefs about what his financial losses meant for him. And like you said, a lot of them might be doing all the right things, but it's still not enough. They still don't feel good enough. They still don't feel like they're able to succeed. So what role does mindset play in financial literacy? It's like, you're right. I mean, a lot of people, there's so many shows about, budgeting and saving money. Dave Ramsey using cash envelopes. I mean, all this stuff, right? But if your mindset isn't in the right place, if you don't have a good understanding about why you're doing what you're doing, all of those things are just Band-Aids you're putting, covering up what at the core needs to be fixed, right?
Yeah. So what you're hitting on, Dr. Sekandari, is that so many people think that more information will make them feel better. And we are reinforced that message throughout our lives. As children, when we study more, we get better grades on the spelling bee. When we get our first job and we stay late or we come early, we are rewarded by our boss. So this overworking, over-preparing, and over-learning tends to be the compensation that I see a lot. But when it comes to money, yes, learning is great. And to your point, what is underneath that desire to consume as much personal finance content as possible, or to accumulate as much money as possible, or to save as much money as possible? What is behind or underneath that desire to move up to whatever the next level is? And so when I'm working with somebody, to your point, somebody who says or thinks, because my net worth isn't as high as I thought it would be, my life is worthless. We get into a lot of black and white thinking. We get into a lot of just cognitive distortions in general. And so sitting with what is underneath that, why is that the number that you're chasing or the idea that you're chasing? And so to take this person who says, I need more money because that's what I need, I would dig in with a little bit of loving curiosity to say, what do you need it for? What's your plan for it? How do you plan on using it or spending it or saving it or investing it? For a lot of people, they think they need more money just because they need more money. And let me be very clear that we all need money to survive. We live in a society that says we need money in order to pay for things like food and shelter, to pay for our retirement, to pay for co-pays for healthcare, and to pay for entertainment, going out to dinner with friends, going to see a movie, going on a vacation. We need money in our society. We earn it, loan it, lend it, save it, spend it every single day in our lives. So with the person who is accumulating money and wants more money because they want more money, I think it's helpful to just start at the basics and say, well, how much do you need? There's so much noise in our society about the importance of accumulating just as much as possible. And I think it's important to have enough and more than enough to take care of your financial needs and have enough left over to contribute back to causes that are important to you or back into your community in ways that feel meaningful. But at the same time, this chasing of more for no reason gets to be really problematic for a lot of people. They say things like, well, I just need $10,000 more. And they go out and they work or they side hustle their way to get that additional $10,000. And then they come in to see me and say, ooh, I actually need $20,000 more. And we end up in this cycle of I need more, I achieve it. Ooh, actually, it's not enough. Instead of asking, why do you need it? What are you going to do with it? How is it going to change or impact your life if, when you earn more? And underneath that, then we can get into why. Well, I actually need more money because I realized that I'm super anxious over the past 2 years with the financial uncertainty in our world, that I need more money in an emergency fund. And the old rule of thumb of 6 months to 8 months of emergency expenses just doesn't feel safe enough or secure enough. And what I really want is a full year of expenses in emergency fund. That's a very different goal to save a year of expenses in an emergency fund than to earn more just because. And once we can start painting or connecting why behind a particular financial goal to the behavior, that can help to dial down that anxiety. And then in terms of mindset, we also see it in the other way. So that's in the example of the person who just needs more money because they need more money. But what about the person who has more money, who's terrified of spending it? I also see a lot of clients who are doing the right things on paper and are feeling guilt. Particularly right now, I'm seeing a lot of financial survivor's guilt if people haven't been impacted as much by inflation or by, maybe they didn't have kids who were daycare aged. And so they didn't have to pay for daycare over the last 2 years. They had school-aged children and they didn't have that big expense. And so for them, they're experiencing this guilt of, I have this money. What am I supposed to do with it? How am I supposed to use it? I feel so bad that I have it. And they kind of sit on it and aren't using it versus saying, what are my needs? What would feel good for me to use this money for? Are there other goals that still need funding? And how can I get comfortable spending money? Because money, to get really kind of into the linguistics of it, money is currency. And when we think about a current, we can think of one of two things. We can think of an electric current where you kind of turn on and off a switch. Or you can think of like a river current. When you dam it up, it stops flowing. So thinking about money as this two-way, sustainable and regenerative tool instead of something that is bad or wrong or gross. I always tell my clients that money is a neutral tool that we all need. And it can be used for harm, but it also can be used for good. And just having money doesn't mean you're a bad person. So I went off on a tangent about mindset because it's so nuanced. And I wanted to give your listeners a couple of examples of how having an unclear relationship with money can really impact their mindset, which then can impact their financial behaviors.
I'm so glad you brought that up because there are so many people that are afraid. There's a fear of success around money because for some religions, there's a message that money is the root of all evil. And if you become wealthy, then you're not a good person, basically. You can use it for evil purposes. And we are looking at how the billionaires are spending their money right now. And we're like, there are people starving. There's so many issues that can be addressed. And you're focusing on going to space, for example.
Right, right.
So that's like, that sends us, I think what people don't realize, and the reason I wanted to have this discussion, is that people don't realize at the subconscious level, there is such a deep energy response to money, whether positive or negative. It all depends on how you grew up. Like that book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, the two dads just basically having a completely different understanding of money is for, how you can get money. And I know with women in particular, a lot of women feel they're not worthy of asking for more. They're afraid to ask for a raise. They're afraid to negotiate a higher salary when they're getting a job. They're just not expecting. And so a lot of us as women are not taught, like you said, even in the school level, we're not taught financial literacy. We're not taught to feel like there is enough money. We're taught in a way that there's a lack of, and we have to fight each other for it, instead of having this abundance mindset. So like you said, it is totally nuanced and it could go in so many different directions. And this is why I kind of wanted to just have people start thinking about, what's my connection or my understanding of money? How was I brought up around the topic of money, that only bad people have money and you have to work really hard for the little bit that you have, but that makes you a good person because you're working really hard and struggling. And so all of that needs to be challenged, I feel like. And I like that you said you have to really get clear about your why. Why is it that you want more? I know there are a lot of immigrants. I'm an immigrant. When we come to this country, you have this idea. I mean, this is the land of opportunity, but it's not paved with gold. You don't, like a lot of people in other countries think, oh, you go to America and you're instantly rich. It's not like that. But for some families, they want to portray that belief that I am made of so much money in America, and I'm going to send you a little bit to continue to have, for you to have that perception of me, even though they're really struggling here, because they're trying to keep up appearances and trying to keep up with the Joneses or keep up with spending more than they have. So can you just kind of talk about those issues? I know I kind of went all over the place. Just pick whatever you want out of that to talk about.
Yeah, I would love to talk about a couple of things. One thing that you brought up is how, or at least kind of what I heard there was, how does our childhood or our upbringing impact our relationship with money? And then as you were talking, I kind of heard it kind of branch into a few different places. So most of your audience listening to this podcast would not argue with the fact that what happens in our childhood impacts us as adults. But what we often forget is that our relationship with money also started in childhood. So we have to kind of look back at what was going on in our early childhood years to figure out what were the messages that we got around money. Did we get the message, like you hinted at, that money is the root of all evil? Which, segue for a second, that's actually been mistranslated. It's actually the love of money above all else is the root of all evil. But over time, it has been translated and it's shortened into that little snippet. So it's actually, if you've heard that before, I invite you to chat with your rabbi or your priest to see if they can kind of dig into that with you. I think it would be an interesting conversation to have with them. But go back to your childhood and think, what were my parents or caregivers telling me about money? Were they always fighting? Were they saying we don't have enough? Were they saying it's rude to talk about money? Don't do it. Were they telling you, oh, don't worry, we'll always have enough. You're too young to worry about that. What were kind of the messages that you were getting around money? What did birthdays or holidays look like? Did you get a ton of gifts? Was a one special meal from fast food the gift for you? When you went to school, were you the kid who brought 24 cupcakes in, or were you the kid that didn't have anything to bring? So thinking about what were the messages that you got around money and kind of what categories did they fall into? Did it fall into, if you have money, you're bad, you're wrong, that kind of first category? Was the message, if you work hard, you'll be rewarded, which doesn't always work, but that's the message a lot of us get. Is the message, hold on tightly to money, keep your antenna up, people will scam you? Or was the message, you can't take it to the grave, so you might as well spend it while you're alive. You might as well spend it while you have it. And so thinking back through, what were the messages that I got about money? How did it make me feel? And how does it impact the way I look at my money now? Research has shown that by the time we're about 8 years old, we have more or less decided what we think money is, or we have more or less formed our money story. And our money story informs what we think we are allowed to do with money. So what we believe about money impacts whether or not we think we can ask for a raise, whether or not we think we can spend money, what we can spend money on, if we're allowed to have debt. If we are allowed to have debt, is there any debt that's good debt, or is there debt that's bad debt? Are you supposed to keep your money private? Are you supposed to talk about it? Those are all of the things that inform our money story. I'll pause there for a second. And then the other thing that we can get into is how women and men are socialized around money as well, if that sounds good. So you mentioned how women sometimes struggle to negotiate for a raise or to ask for the amount of money that they need. And as recently as 2017, research found that in the United States, men and women, rather boys and girls, are being taught and conditioned different things about money. So they're getting different messages. It's more likely that young girls are going to get the message of how important it is to save, how important it is to manage a household budget. And young boys are getting messages about how important it is to earn money. So this might look like telling, a 10-year-old, a 10-year-old boy, go ahead and start a lemonade stand, or see if the neighbor needs help with yard work. Whereas a 10-year-old girl might get messages like, why don't you come with me to the grocery store and we can shop for the things that are on sale? So from the time we are little, we're already being conditioned to do different things. So women are taught it's important to save and to spend less, and men are more likely to be taught it's important to earn, and it's important to negotiate, and it's important to assert yourself for income. And so as adults, that can look like women being more comfortable managing a grocery budget, but getting really uncomfortable thinking about financial projections, thinking about how much money do we need to put away if we want to retire in 20 years. When it comes to men as they age, they might not have a clue what's going on in the personal finances. They might not know how much the utility bill is or how much gas costs, but they have a better picture of how much money they're earning. So those things show up for us. And it's so important in my opinion, for salary transparency to be across the board, so that whether it's a woman or a man or a trans person going in for a job interview, they have an idea of what is kind of the band of pay or the average compensation for this particular position. How can I be empowered going into that job interview? And if you are getting ready to go on the job market at the time of this recording, we're still in the Great Resignation, meaning employers need good workers. So if you're going back on the job market, it makes perfect sense to ask friends or colleagues how much they make. And if you're uncomfortable saying, hey, what's your salary? You can frame it as asking for guidance or help, which a lot of people are much more apt to give. So instead of, hey, how much do you make? You could say to somebody who works in the field that you're interested in, hey, I'm getting ready to update my resume and go after, project management jobs. I'm transitioning from, customer facing jobs to a project manager job. I'm kind of thinking the salary range that I should be looking for is, 100 to 115,000. Does that sound about right to you? And so that could be another way that you pose the question of how much should I be making in this position? Of course, different resources that you can look into are things like Glassdoor, LinkedIn Careers sometimes has some interesting data on how much you can get paid. But going in educated about how much you can earn is a great thing. And then even if you accept a job, let's say a few months later, you find out you're being underpaid, it doesn't mean you have to stick with that same salary. You can go in and ask your manager to sit down and have that salary negotiation conversation. And a lot of people think, I have to wait until I'm somewhere for a year before they negotiate. I don't know where that rule came from. I think it's like old folklore that just keeps getting recycled. You can always ask for a raise. And if they say no also doesn't always mean no. You can always say, if they say no, we don't have it in the budget to give you a pay raise, you can say something like, I hear you right now, and would it be possible for us to have another conversation in 90 days to see if anything has changed? Or you could say, I understand that you can't increase the budget for my pay. Is there any way we could do some more flexible work from home days, or you could do some additional vacation days? There are so many other ways to negotiate for a job that feels good for you outside of just your paycheck.
Those are some really good points. I'm glad that you brought up the fact that we are uncomfortable talking about money. I know that there's issues with that too. What is it about sharing about our salary? What is it about that we're having a hard time talking about? What have you found in the people you've talked to?
It's really funny because it's also kind of cultural, it's sociological, it depends on our socioeconomic status. So I do some volunteer work with a group in my community for folks who are in poverty. And before you can even go in and kind of work, you have to do about 4 months of onboarding and training to learn about, the health disparities and the poverty gap and the wealth gap and things like that. And one of the things that they taught me in that onboarding training that I find so interesting and that I now repeat all the time is that actually a lot of people talk about money, but not the group that we necessarily imagine talks about money. So people who self-identify as middle class in the United States, those are the people who don't like to talk about money. People who are in poverty do talk about money because it's a survival mechanism. They have to say things to their friends and to their neighbors. Hey, where did you get groceries this week? Where did you find a job? How much did you pay for your rent? It's so much different. It's different in that environment where you are talking about what deals you got, who's hiring, how much rent is. That's much a more normal part of the conversation. Same thing goes with the uber wealthy. They also talk about money a lot. They talk about who their stockbroker is. They talk about who their lawyer is. They talk about how they are saving money on taxes. They talk about money a lot. But in the middle class in the United States, we are socialized to not talk about it. We're told that it's rude. We're told that it's impolite. We're told that we're still kind of sold on this myth of the American dream that if you're middle class, then you can have what you want. But we know that hasn't been the case for at least 40 years. Wages, when adjusted for inflation in middle class, have not gone up for the past 40 years. So when I hear people who are of different generations than me say things like, oh, your generation's complaining about how much debt they have or that they don't make enough money. When I was your age, I paid my way through school. And it's like, yeah, you could pay your way through college with a part-time job 40 years ago, but that isn't an option any longer. So I'm rambling a little bit, but why we don't talk about money is that it's somewhat designed in that way to keep folks kind of quiet and disenfranchised, to say it's not polite to talk about. And so that's built into our societal structure to keep things quiet. And as you kind of hinted at, in different cultures or in different religions, it's reinforced as well, though in probably more subtle ways.
There's a lot of shame around it. And so I'm wondering if the people can't talk about how much they make, then they have to make a grand show of how much they make by throwing lavish parties, very expensive weddings, even though they might be in total debt in a lot of different ways, but they have to make a show. And you don't see the super wealthy doing that necessarily, because a lot of the rich influencers that we see have these beautiful weddings and parties, it's all sponsored, right? Like I was watching Bling Empire, and she threw this huge party on Rodeo Drive, and a lot of it was sponsored. And so the middle class see that, and they're like, well, I can't compete with that, but I'm going to spend everything I have to make a show of how much and so this is how people end up getting into debt. And this is where mindset definitely plays into it, because if you do have shame, if you do have this desire to keep up with the Joneses for whatever reason, because you feel like you're not good enough, you're not, you don't belong, whatever. I mean, Tony Robbins talks about that, how his poverty as a child really motivated him to make money. And then also his dedication and devotion to feeding the hungry stemmed from how somebody came in for one, I don't know if it was Christmas or Thanksgiving, and brought presents and a turkey and food for them. And so now he's like on a mission to really pay that back. So yes, our childhood definitely impacts our connection to money and what it means to be wealthy. I know for me, I didn't like the feeling of being controlled by money as a teenager, as a child. And so I made a vow to be financially independent no matter what. It's like I didn't want to be dependent on anybody for money. So it definitely does affect us in ways that we don't know. And I wanted this conversation for people to start thinking about that and really question, what is my understanding of or what's my beliefs about money? Because mindset plays a part, but also another thing that plays a part is perfectionism and procrastination, right? This is something that you specialize in. Can you talk a little bit about how those two things can create more financial anxiety for us?
Yeah, I love that question about how perfectionism and procrastination are really two sides of the same coin. And what I mean by that is, for a lot of people who have just generalized baseline anxiety, a way to cope with anxiety that is a temporary help, but can end up being really stressful in the long run, is consuming a lot of information. So this perfectionism around, I have to read every book on personal finance. I have to get the best app if I want to stick to a budget. I have to research the best financial planner that I can. So there's a lot of time and energy kind of pushed into being perfect with money because we don't like feeling less than. We don't like that feeling of discomfort or that feeling of anxiety. So we go, I know what I'll do. I'll research as much as possible. But in this quest for financial perfectionism that often looks like researching, there's procrastination happening because behind the scenes, instead of, calling 3 financial advisors and picking the best one, you'll spend 6 months or 8 months or a year looking for the best financial planner. Meanwhile, you haven't done anything with your personal finances for the year, or you spend a ton of time and energy taking negotiations courses, but you never actually go in and negotiate with your boss because you want it to be perfect. So this duality of perfectionism and procrastination can really impact us financially speaking, because the longer we put off taking those little steps towards improving our relationship with money, I don't want to say the worse it will get, but the harder it is to kind of get that positive momentum going versus saying something like, I wish I knew more about retirement and investing in retirement, but I know enough to at least get started. Something that I think happens a lot is that people want everything to be perfect with their finances, and then they end up kind of missing out on things. So I think back to friends who were looking to buy a house in 2019 or 2020, but they kept waiting for the perfect house to come on the market. And here we are now 2 years later, 3 years later, and housing costs, depending on where you live, have gone up between 18 and 22%. So they could have bought a house or afforded to buy a house 3 years ago, but now they're kind of priced out of the market because they were waiting for the perfect house. And the same thing can happen if you're waiting for the perfect job, or you're waiting for the perfect checking account, or you're waiting for the perfect retirement plan to come up. There are good enough things that we can do, and those good enough things can create a positive ripple effect over time. So getting started is so much better than not getting started. But with anxiety, it's really hard to get comfortable with it being good enough, right? With anxiety and perfectionism, we want it to be perfect. And so that can then lead to procrastination. Well, I don't take any action because I want it to be perfect.
Well, you end up paralyzing yourself, right? Because
Right.
you're looking for that perfect. And I'm a big fan of good enough and parenting and finances and everything. And good enough is especially for people that have anxiety, because their goal always is perfectionism. And that's when you do, what is it, paralysis by analysis, because you're thinking about it so much. And this happens, like I mentioned, about women not asking for what they're worth, not asking for raises. And I know women feel like they have to be 110% qualified for a job that they're applying for, where a man feels like they might be even 10 to 20% qualified for a job, and they'll go for it and they'll most often get it. But a woman, unless she is in her mind 100%, 120% qualified, she's not even going to apply. True. In my past, I've always felt like I've been offered positions and I'm like, oh, but I'm not 110% qualified for that. And now I'm like thinking, I probably didn't need to be, and I've helped a lot of my patients with that feel like, well, I just got this promotion and I'm not good enough. It's like, you're going to learn. Nobody's expecting you to be perfect. And that's what people need to really understand. So yeah, I'm glad you touched on that, because I feel like that's a really big hindrance in a lot of ways with our brain if we have anxiety, right? The perfectionism and the procrastination. So can you talk a little bit about, like I talked about, how financial instability can create a lot of stress? How can we improve our mental health by being more financially stable or more financially literate, or even learning how to improve our mindset? How can that help us with our mental health?
I think a lot of people who are kind of on the cusp of getting out of some sort of cycle with their money that isn't healthy or is really challenging. So they're finding themselves living paycheck to paycheck, or they're struggling to get that raise. It just always feels like a little bit out of reach, is they start to get pretty hopeless. And they tell themselves things like, well, if I can't save, 6 months of an emergency fund, what's the point? And so then they don't save at all. Or, if I can't pay down this credit card debt, I might as well take out another one because I'm never going to be able to pay it back. Instead of kind of shifting into having $50 in the bank is better than having $0 in the bank. I think, again, in our culture, we are so quick to reward those overnight successes or those big wins that we forget that for most people, it's those small, steady actions that we take that make a big difference. For example, if you think about compound interest in retirement, so that's the idea that however much money you have is earning a little bit of money interest, and then that money, the interest that you earned, goes into that original pool of money and allows you to earn more money on it. And so over time, compound interest creates this beautiful snowball effect that can help to generate more money and hopefully generate more wealth. Well, the opposite is true as well. If you have credit card debt at 18%, let's say you charge something for $100 and you have 18% interest rate, that $100 bill now becomes a $118 bill. And it just becomes so much harder to get out of it. I think the other thing too is that our systems make it really challenging for people to get out of debt and to stay out of debt. In other countries, they don't have the same type of access to the sheer amount of debt that we do here in the United States. And a lot of other places, if you're going to buy a house, you have to put at least 20% down, or you have to put 50% down. Here in the US, you can put down 3 or 5% and be able to get a huge mortgage. Same thing with credit cards. In other countries, it's really hard to get a credit limit of $20,000, but here in the US, you can get a credit card limit of $1,000 pretty quickly and then go on and get a $5,000 limit and then go on and get a $20,000 limit. So yes, we can change our mindset and we can change some of our habits, but it's also about giving ourselves a little bit of grace and understanding that the system that we're in can make it a bit harder. So it's a little bit of that both and of yes, take steps. Yes, it is possible, and understand that for a lot of us, the financial deck is stacked against us, but that doesn't mean that we just have to give up. It means that we have to figure out creative ways to kind of work within the system that we live.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that whole black and white thinking, either I have a year's worth of money saved or I save nothing. But like you said, it's the little bit. You can start putting away $1 a day, and that's $30 a month. And before you know it, you have $300 a year, and then it just keeps adding up. I'm trying to teach that for my daughter, and it's like a lot of kids are not taught, and we're living in an instant gratification society where I want it, I see it. But isn't that a song? I feel like that's a song. I see it, I want it, and I'm going to get it. And it doesn't always work that way. And when you have a credit card, it's so much easier to just not even have a concept of how much I spent, and then feeling buried under. And this is what I'm talking about, the mental health aspect of it. When one of my patients wanted to take his life, it's just the debt started snowballing. It was becoming too much. He felt like he could never, ever get out of it. Well, there are a lot of financial support. There are resources. If you have a lot of IRS debt, there are places that can help you pay that off over time or consolidate. If you have student loans, there's consolidation. There's support out there, as well as therapists like you that can really help you get your life back on track. I would never, ever want anybody to feel like suicide is the solution for this overwhelming anxiety. There are ways to get help. I love the idea of living below my means. I always think about Warren Buffett. He is a multi-billionaire. He wears the same suits. They're not fancy. They're not expensive. He drives a modest car. He has lived in the same modest house. And this just reminds me of the concept of rich people have bigger libraries, poor people have bigger TVs, right? A lot of people, when they're feeling not successful financially, I guess, they want that instant gratification. It's like, well, I'm never going to have that lifestyle, so I'm going to get what I need now. But I think reducing the spending can make you feel more empowered, like you're making decisions instead of feeling, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, this is just my beliefs on this, instead of feeling like you're being controlled by your desires and by overconsumption, you're making a decision. I'm doing this because I have a bigger picture for myself. I want to have more financial control in my future. So I'm planting the seed now. Just talk a little bit about that if you have anything.
Yeah, it's so interesting because of course we want instant gratification. When we think about what's literally happening when we are exchanging our credit card for something that we want, very few things in our life are that predictable and that certain. So if I can turn my credit card over and get, the 50-inch TV, then that feels really good, right? We're getting that hit of dopamine, probably long-term, we're probably getting some serotonin and maybe even some oxytocin as well. So what's really hard for people when they're working on spending less is that it feels awful. It doesn't feel good to spend less money if that has been the way that you have been routinely getting that dopamine, that serotonin, and that oxytocin. So instead of saying just stop spending, we need to replace those different chemicals that we would be getting. So if we say stop spending money, we need to figure out a way to get that hit for our brain and for our body. So that means, how can we find a replacement for dopamine? Dopamine's that quick hit, that excitement, that I think of it as like the roller coaster kind of feeling that we get in our brain. So how can we recreate that? When it comes to oxytocin, that's also known as the love hormone. So how else can we replace that? Can we spend more quality time with family and friends and loved ones? When it comes to serotonin that we can often treat with SSRIs or SNRIs, if we're using our spending to get that, how can we cultivate relaxation and rest and kind of that type of feeling? And so oftentimes it's about replacing instead of just stopping something. Another kind of parallel that often comes up, I've been in recovery for an eating disorder for over a decade. So we also have to think about, when it comes to recovering from eating disorders, we can't just stop eating, right? We have to have it to survive. And it's the same thing with money. We have to earn it and spend it to survive. So we can't just cut off the spending. We have to replace that spending behavior with something else that is going to be healthier over the long term. Of course, it's not going to be that exciting. Like gambling feels really fun. Shopping feels really fun because it is that quick hit. So how else can we cultivate getting those things? So I mentioned maybe oxytocin, we need to spend quality time with loved ones. Maybe for serotonin, we need to do some relaxation activities. That might mean like doing some yoga or reading a book or coloring or whatever it may be. When it comes to that dopamine hit, how can we cultivate that excitement? Are there some like brain games that we can play? Are there some other things that we can do to kind of cultivate that? Then once we have replaced that spending behavior or that gambling or that whatever it is that is not great for us financially, then we can look to that saving money as another way to cultivate those types of things, of seeing that money grow over time and how powerful that is to be investing in ourselves. It's really hard to say something like, don't go shopping anymore, because we will always need to go shopping for different things. But it's much healthier to say, do I need this particular shirt this very moment? Maybe the answer is no, and I can postpone and I can save up for it and purchase it when I actually have the money in my bank account to do so.
That was a really good point. And you're right. I mean, whenever, especially for an over anxious brain, to say, I can't have that.
Yes.
Yes. About it, right? Like if I'm told you can never go shopping again, all I'm going to do is figure out how to go shopping again.
Exactly.
And one of my patients actually was brilliant about this. And she did definitely have a shopping addiction, but she ended up channeling that need by going to the dollar store or going to the thrift stores. So she would have a certain amount of money that she would still get that dopamine hit, because when you go to the thrift store, you can find some amazing finds for a fraction of a cost. Right. So something that would cost you $200, you might get it for $7. And it's like, whoa, I scored big. And so this is why I love that the Gen Zers and the millennials are normalizing thrift shopping and finding things on eBay, finding things that are used, buying things that are significantly less. Like my daughter recently discovered this herself. She's like, I used to go to Cold Stone and buy this ice cream that was like $7 a cone. And now I found a whole container at Trader Joe's that's the same flavor for so much more, and I get more out of it.
Right, right.
Figuring that out. It's like I'm still getting it, but at a reduced rate, discounted rate. I'm not buying as much, or maybe I'm buying the same, but I'm saving that money, and then I can channel that and put it in a savings account. Because there's also a dopamine hit when I see my savings account grow, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, I didn't even know I saved this much, and I was really good about budgeting, and now I have this much that I can spend. So, but shopping addiction is real. I mean, it is as much of an addiction as an eating disorder, as gambling, as substance abuse, and it needs to be treated. We're not saying that if you truly have an issue to do all this on your own. Definitely seek help. It just makes it a lot easier, and you don't have to beat yourself up, because this isn't a blame game at all. This is all about figuring out what's happening to my brain right now, because those brain chemicals you talked about, the dopamine hit, the serotonin hit, the oxytocin hit, which is the bonding chemicals, the calming chemical, the excitement chemicals, they're very addicting. We want all of that. That makes us feel alive and makes us happy. So finding out how to handle this in a way that's healthy and sustaining and long-term is really, really important. And we're not going to be able to give you a quick little solution here in a podcast.
Yeah, but I think I love what you just said. It's not about blaming or shaming. It's about acknowledging that this is complicated and there are small things that we can do to start feeling better. And going back to that like quick fix, it would be nice. I would love to read one book and then feel amazing. But what happens is when I read a book, I get a few nuggets of wisdom that I can start implementing into my life. And so for folks who are listening to this podcast, and maybe it's the first time they've been exposed to words like money mindset or financial anxiety, that's great. And for the folks who've heard it a dozen times, maybe today your brain's more open to hearing it, or the way that the two of us talked about it today helped to make more sense. It's a journey and it's a process, and you're not alone. So I'm just so glad that you mentioned that it's not a blame. It's not about shame. It's that the more exposure we can have to this type of language and understanding that it isn't just about, the spreadsheets and the budgets, it's about how we feel too, the better off we'll be financially speaking.
Well, like you said, the system is kind of set up against us as well.
Right.
Kind of like with the food addiction or sugar addiction, it's everywhere. It's very easy for us to get into debt. Literally, there's so many, like even these check cashing places that keep us in debt, and we don't even realize because we need the money. We get caught up in that system, and that creates a horrible cycle for people and keeps them in poverty. The system is definitely not set up to support us to have a healthy view of money and to have a healthy connection with money. So the temptation is definitely there, and there's a lot vying for our attention and wanting our dollars. So we have to be mindful, but first we have to balance out our brain chemicals, and first we have to feel in control internally. And in order to do that, and this is where the financial therapy comes in. This is where treating your anxiety comes in. This is where prioritizing your mental health comes in. Because when we're balanced emotionally and internally, we can make better decisions. We can make more rational decisions instead of more emotional decisions.
Well, so well said.
So given that you know everything that you know now and all the stuff that you've been doing and working with other people, what would you tell your younger self about financial therapy or financial anxiety?
I would have told my younger self to open up a retirement account sooner. I think, I just was thinking like, retirement's for when I'm old, which is hopefully true. But wow, the power of putting money away when you're young makes such a big difference. So I just would have told myself to put a little bit away for the future. But really, other than that, I think it's like, we get into mistakes and we learn from them, and almost nothing is permanent when it comes to, some of these money decisions. Yes, I probably spent too much when I was younger. I probably could have been a better steward of my money. And at the same time, it gave me a lot of learning to do. But yeah, I would have saved a little bit more.
Same. Yeah, definitely. But at the same time, I look back on being a student all those years and being in survival mode and having to pay all these bills. And we did the best we could, right?
Exactly. You do the best you can, or you did the best you could with what you had.
And also, I love what Maya Angelou said, when you know better, you do better. Exactly. So now that you're learning and thinking about all this stuff, now is the time to do better. Now is the time to start saving. Now is the time to start acknowledging issues that you might have with money and address it. And hopefully it'll help you moving forward.
Yeah. So true.
So where can people find you and connect with you? Are you on social media at all? Or are you,
Yeah, I am. So my business is called Mind Money Balance. You can find me on Instagram at that handle. My podcast is of the same name and my website is of the same name. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about your money mindset, you can take a free quiz to learn about your financial archetype at mindmoneybalance.com/quiz.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having this discussion with me. This was so interesting. It's something that I haven't really thought about doing an interview about, but I am so glad that I found you and that we were able to have this discussion.
Thank you for having me. This was so fun.
I'd love to hear your feedback about today's episode. If you haven't already, you can show support for the Mental Health Break podcast by subscribing wherever you're tuning in from today. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or a 5-star rating, since that'll help others find the podcast. Subscribe today so you get notified when new episodes drop. Bye for now.